What's up guys, I'm Connor and you're watching the Movavi vlog, your go-to channel for creating cool videos. Today I'm going to expand on exposure and tips and tricks on how to utilize exposure properly. But when we say exposure, we're not talking about exposure in the press. Just to make it a little bit clearer for you, we'll show you some of the examples that we made and then we'll show you how exactly we made those. This is called Freezelight photography, or light photography, or light art, performance photography, whatever you want to call it. But either way, you've seen it on the internet and you probably thought to yourself, well, that's a pretty cool idea. It's its own genre. Some of the first light painting experiments were carried out by Pablo Picasso, but even before him, there was a man named Man Ray, who was an artist and photographer who tried to do something very similar, even before Pablo Picasso did. This type of photography has an incredible number of applications, from unusual photographs or portraits, landscapes, using the light as your logo. I mean, the list kind of goes on, and you can use it for anything and everything. Hold on, what does this have to do with exposure? Well, if you're light painting, then one of the photographic techniques you're going to need to use is a long exposure. So if you have a camera where you can adjust the exposure and a tripod, then you're pretty much set to jet. In photography, exposure is the amount of time that it takes for light to reach the photographic film or the digital matrix, which then captures the image on the carrier. And if the light moves, as long as the shutter remains open, then the image remains on the matrix. If you set a camera with a long exposure and in the frame there will be cars passing by with the headlights on, they'll leave a trail of lights. At the same time, you see everything that was static in the frame remain clear and is far from blurred. Sure, it's not just the case with light. If you stand in the middle of a flow of people in a busy street on a fine day and set a long exposure, then the people passing by will become blurred and the objects that remained motionless will appear to be clear. To take such a picture, you need a tripod because it's very important to keep the camera absolutely static. Pushing the dial gives unwanted vibration, so even still objects get smudged if they're photographed with such a long exposure. It'll be perfect if you have a remote control for your camera, but if you don't, go for a self-timer. We set ours for 2 seconds and switched the burst mode on not to miss a thing. Our camera settings for the long exposure shooting were f/22 for the aperture, 1.3 for the shutter speed, and 50 for ISO. But if you just increase the shutter speed in the camera settings, in most cases, you're going to get an overexposed shot with indistinct objects there. So you should decrease the ISO parameter and make sure the aperture is narrower. If you have no clue what I'm trying to say, I would suggest that you watch our video on this topic. So you're confident and capable in using long exposure to shoot cars, running people, something alongside trains, and so on. So now let's move on to Freezelight. If you're wanting a particular image, then you're going to have to use a lot of trial and error. But eventually you'll get to the point where you're creating complex images and you're going to be really happy with them. An added bonus is if you have the ability to paint or draw or anything like that, because if you can, then this Freezelight is going to be a breeze for you. If you want to make abstract forms, then just use your imagination. The light source can be anything from a flashlight to fairy lights, LED strips, sparklers, I don't know, steel wool on fire. I mean, the list goes on and on. It can be any unusual illuminator. You just need to adapt to using those. But if you really, really want to use a laser pointer, don't do it because you could ruin your camera. So no laser pointers, don't do it, no laser pointers, don't do it. Cool. Let's start with the least apparent points. If you don't want to be visible in the picture, stay out of light-colored, bright, and light-reflecting clothing like Romans. You better put on darker clothes. Try to always be on the move and most importantly, keep away from light sources while shooting a Freezelight, otherwise you'll show up in the frame. Okay, let's get started. The sun is just about to set. We have to note that we rehearsed all of our actions beforehand to show you what we did while taking these pictures, but the result came up after a few hours of shooting in total darkness. Now let's start with the sparkles. Can you see how Sasha, our Freezelight painter, moves? Such a ritual dance gives you soaring light balls like these ones. To make shooting of these photos possible, we set f/22 for the aperture, 20 seconds for the shutter speed, and 50 for ISO. And just like in the case with the daylight photos, don't forget to set the self-timer to avoid camera shaking. You can light paint anything you want with the aid of a flashlight or write something like we did. Here, camera settings depend on the brightness of your flashlight. We achieved an intended effect with f/13, ISO 50, and the 47-second shutter speed. We set the bulb mode, hold the dial, and released it when the painting was over. Steel wool maybe is one of the coolest materials to take Freezelight photos with. We bought it in a hardware store. A whisk and a piece of rope can be really useful as well. Attach the rope to the handle of the whisk, put the steel wool inside just like this, and then light it up. But be careful with it. Choose open spaces for your fire experiments, stay away from other people, dry grass, and flammable liquids. We don't recommend that the underage replicate such things without parental supervision. You can create a ball of light like we did with sparkles. A portal just like in Doctor Strange is a great option too. It can be even cooler if somebody comes out of the portal. You can achieve this effect with a camera flash or powerful flashlight. We chose the camera flash. When the piece of steel wool was about to go out, Roman lit up Sasha's figure as if he steps out of the portal. Oops, do you remember I told you that you could show up in the frame if you were wearing light-colored clothes? Well, this is it, but it's easy to fix. Drop the photo into Movavi Photo Editor. Click on the Object Removal tab. Select an appropriate tool. In our case, it's the brush tool. Paint over the unwanted object on the background, and you're done. This camera flash method is quite sufficient, and we call it light painting. Look, it seems like a regular photo taken in constant light, but in reality, the photograph was taken in complete darkness. In this way, not only static objects, but also people can then be highlighted as well. I mean, as long as you tell those people to hold still for a couple seconds. This approach is your lifeline when you're shooting in places that are hard to reach or very poorly lit, or some area where you don't want to take all of your lighting equipment because there's no outlets, or maybe you're taking a small car. So for example, you got caves, mines, in the middle of the forest, mountains, any of that stuff. But if you look at long exposure photography from a creative perspective, then you'll kind of realize that the possibilities are virtually endless. Tell us or show us in the comments what type of photos you're looking forward to getting and the photos that you've already gotten with the aid of long exposure. And click here to watch our episode on how light and snow work together in Ed Sheeran's music video. And who knows, maybe it'll inspire you to take some breathtaking summer photos. Hit some buttons underneath the video, and we will see you the next time we post. All right, bye.